You're going to learn the key to controlling your negative thinking during games. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, I'm a performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. So what does negative thinking look like for you as an athlete during games? Well, there are three main types of this negative thinking, but in general, negative thinking is thinking that hurts your game, right? Causes you to underperform. The first form of negative thinking is negative self-talk. This is where you have thoughts such as, I suck, I can't believe I did that, I'm awful, I don't know if I can play against them, I'm terrible, why does coach have me out here? All those just negative things that you could say to yourself that you would never even imagine saying to your teammates. Those are a major cause of underperforming, and often they're going to show their face whenever you have made a mistake or whenever you've been playing poorly in games recently. Another type of negative thinking that I see a lot in athletes is outcome-oriented thinking. Now, outcome-oriented thinking means you're thinking too much about what's going to happen. The reason that I categorize this as a type of negative thinking is mainly because it's one of the main driving forces of most mental blocks within athletes. The fear of failure and performance anxiety being two of the main ones that are going to cause you to underperform. These are formed by you thinking too much about what's going to happen, and most specifically thinking and worrying about what's going to happen and being afraid of what's going to happen. Now, I know that the outcome is what you want to have happen during a game. That's why you're playing your sport in the first place. But the reason that it is a form of negative thinking is because you think too much about the outcome. That consumes your mind and consumes your focus when in reality you need to be focused on what you're doing at that moment. The third type of negative thinking is perfectionist thinking. Perfectionist thinking means, you're going into a game saying, I have to perform perfectly today. I can't make any mistakes today. Now, this is going to hurt your game in a few different ways. One is going to be that if you go into a game thinking I have to play perfectly, what do you think that's going to do to the level of stress and tension that you play with? Do you think you're going to be playing perfectly relaxed if you think I can't make any mistakes today? It's going to be a lot likelier that you are experiencing some tension and some anxiety when you play. Another reason that perfectionist thinking is going to be hurtful is because if you make a mistake during a game, but you say that you need to play perfectly, it's going to be a lot harder to move on from that mistake. But one mistake, two mistakes, that's not that big of a deal during a game. You can move on from that. But what you can't move on from is getting so frustrated over one mistake that you make another mistake, and then it just snowballs into overall a bad performance in general. So those are the three main types of negative thinking that I see in athletes I work with within one-on-one coaching. Which, by the way, if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one mental performance coaching, I put a link to that in the description below. Now, before I get into the 2 steps you can take to control this negative thinking, I want to cover one of the main reasons that it can sometimes be very difficult for athletes to control their negative thinking. It has to do with the idea of forcing, trying to force these negative thoughts out of your head. As soon as you know a certain type of thinking is going to be hurtful to your game, what's going to be natural is for you to try to force it out of your head if you notice that it's there. An example of this is if you have some negative self-talk after a mistake. Well, one of the reasons that negative self-talk after a mistake is going to hold you back is because you are still focused on the mistake, but then also you're beating yourself up. Now, if you notice that you have this negative self-talk and then you try to force it out of your head, so you think, okay, I can't think like that. I got to stop having those negative thoughts. Why do I have these negative thoughts? Get out of here. I can't think that way. Well, number one, you're still distracted, right? You're still thinking about the mistake, the negative thoughts, anything and everything but the next play that you need to be focused on. But also, you're still giving your attention to those negative thoughts, so it's much more likely that they're going to stay there. In reality, whenever we're trying to stop any form of thinking, the best solution we have is substitution. We have to substitute the thoughts for different types of thoughts. We can't force the thoughts out of our mind. We just have to substitute them, replace them with something else, right? So this is where we get into this 2-part strategy. This 2-part strategy for controlling your negative thinking. It has more of a long-term approach and a short-term approach, and both are very important. Because number one, we know that time's going to go by, right? Time's going to go by. It's going to be next season before you know it. And so by next season, how are you going to be at controlling this negative thinking? If you follow this first step, you're going to be a lot better at it. If you overlook it, it's not going to have much of a change, right? The other part is more of an in-the-moment strategy. And that's for you, if you have a game tomorrow or next week, how are you going to control that negative thinking when you realize that it's there? So the first part is altering your natural thought patterns. Your natural thought patterns are, just kind of the natural way that you think. And this becomes very clear when we think about why are those negative thoughts there in the first place. You're not trying to think negatively to yourself. They just tend to happen for the most part. The reason that they tend to happen is because this is a natural way of thinking, a natural thought pattern. What we want to work on is changing this natural thought pattern, turning it from more of a negative natural thought pattern to more of a positive and productive natural thought pattern. The simplest and the best way that I've found to do this is by repetition. And all this repetition is you come up with a list of more positive thoughts that you want to say to yourself, thoughts you would like to have when you're playing, and then you begin rereading that list to yourself on a daily basis. Yes, this does take time, and yes, it may seem very repetitive and mundane, but that's the point. It's just about this repetition. This repetition is going to build these new thought patterns, which is going to make it much easier for you to have this form of positive and productive thinking during games. The second part of this strategy is a thought-stopping phrase that you can use in the moment. So this is if you have a game tomorrow or next week or even a few months from now and just forever, right? You want to be able to have a way to stop these negative thoughts when they happen during games. A thought-stopping phrase is just what it sounds like. A phrase you tell yourself to stop those negative thoughts. It's not a phrase that's going to say, I can't think that way. It's going to be a phrase that begins to substitute the negative thoughts for more positive and productive ones. An example would be, let it go, refocus, I've got the next play. Or let it go, take a breath, let's focus on the next play. But you're just trying to remind yourself that you need to substitute this focus, this thinking from the negative thoughts, the mistake, whatever's causing you to have the negative thoughts to, okay, let it go, let's refocus, take some breaths, let's refocus on the breaths. That's starting to substitute that negative thinking, and then focus on the next play. And then after you say focus on the next play, maybe you start focusing on a specific objective because that's going to help occupy your mind. The main idea with this negative thinking is you need to practice substitution. Don't try to force the negative thoughts out of your mind. Just try to substitute them for a different type of thinking. Now, there are different ways that you can use positive self-talk, which is kind of the idea that we're talking about with substituting these negative thoughts to help you as an athlete. So what I've done right here is I've linked another video that I've made that goes into detail on how you can use positive self-talk as an athlete. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training.